We can do evaluations. We simply have to call them appraisals. Now, that is a correct statement. Here's the problem. As soon as you call it an appraisal, it's no longer a quote-unquote evaluation according to the interagency guidelines.
Originating from deep inside the Rocky Mountains, transported through the power of the internet, and arriving inside your tiny earbuds. It's the Appraiser Coach Podcast, helping appraisers increase their efficiency, quality, and make more money. Here's the guy who makes it his life's mission to create value for real estate appraisers nationwide. Your host and the Appraiser Coach, Dustin Harris.
Welcome to the program, everybody. Dustin Harris hanging out in the podcast chair. I did an episode recently. I don't have the number in front of me. I apologize, the episode number, but it was regarding CPAs, okay, and what they are allowed to do and not allowed to do. And I made an analogy on that particular episode that I want to clarify because I had a whole lot of feedback, which is great. Thank you. I need to be on my toes. I had a lot of feedback from that episode, and I want to make sure I clarify what I meant and what I foresee as reality, because I think that this is one of the biggest threats to our longevity as appraisers. I am not predicting that we're going out of business. I'm saying that this is something that we should be focused on and something what we need to talk about. The topic on the table today is evaluations. I want to pause here, remind you we are sponsored by Alamode. Alamode, of course, is the software that I've been using for over 20 years, and they've been out there for over 30 years helping appraisers to do more with less. Check them out. Go to alamode.com, alamode.com, or 800-ALAMODE. We are sponsored by OREP Insurance. OREP, of course, is the E&O that you should be using because of the benefits and the low price. Folks, they're a broker. They're going to go out there and shop around and get the best price for you. You can check them out by going to orep.org. That's OREP.org. And finally, we are sponsored by DataMaster. DataMaster, of course, is the company out there helping appraisers to be more efficient and to save time, 30 to 60 minutes per report. You can check them out by going to datamasterusa.com. Again, it's datamasterusa.com. Well, folks, up front, you're going to have to forgive me. My voice is a bit scratchy. I don't think I'm under the weather. I hope not. Knock on wood. But I did have an Appraiser Academy meeting, a very lively Appraiser Academy meeting this morning. We talked about desktops. We talked about alternative valuations and had a lot of interaction from the audience, had a lot in attendance. These are appraisers across the nation. And it was a long meeting, a little over 2 hours, and I was talking through a lot of it. And so I'm a little bit, my voice is fading, let's put it that way. But my mind is not. It is sharp as a tack, and I want to dive right in today talking about evaluations, okay? So a couple of weeks ago, I recorded an episode in the parking lot of my CPA, of my accountant. Okay, I'd met with him for the end of the year review in 2018, and we, after that meeting, had a talk about what's allowed or not allowed by a CPA. And it was more my curiosity than anything. I find other business owners fascinating. It's one of the reasons I've been involved in masterminds for over a decade. I love talking to other business owners about their business, other entrepreneurs talking about what it is that makes them tick. And just as a curiosity, and because he and I had a little bit of time, I talked to Josh, my CPA, and I said, hey, tell me a little bit about your business. And I'm not going to rehash that entire episode. Go back and listen to it. But the point I was trying to make was that there's really nothing that a CPA is disallowed from doing. He can do bookkeeping, he can do payroll, he can do simple taxes, but he can do much more complicated things as well because he is a CPA. But there's no restriction on anything he can and can't do simply because he's quote unquote overqualified to do so. And the point I made on that episode was that we as appraisers are truly at a disadvantage when it comes to evaluations, because the way I put it on the episode is we are disallowed from doing evaluations. Okay. Now, many people took that incorrectly, and it's not their fault, by the way. I went back and listened to the episode, and it sounds like I'm saying something different than I meant. Okay. So I apologize up front. It was my fault, not theirs. Clarification is needed here. I was not saying that it is illegal. In fact, I might have even used those words. Who knows? But my point was not to say it was illegal for appraisers to use to do evaluations. Okay, let me make that very clear. I had lots of people reach out to me, and thankfully, people are on their toes. People listen. I love feedback because it tells me people are actually listening, and I'm not just talking into a microphone. I'm talking to real ears and real brains who think. Thank you. Your feedback is always welcome on these podcasts. There's lots of ways you can do that. You can jump on my Facebook Messenger. You can email me, thecoach@theappraisercoach.com. The best way is to just jump on the podcast website. And a lot of you listen to it on your phone, okay? You can't really do it from your phone. You got to jump on the PC and you got to jump on the Appraiser Coach and click on the podcast and then click on leave a comment, okay? And you can leave a comment right there on the website. And not a lot of people do that, probably because it's difficult to get to. I probably ought to change that. Dustin, note to self, make it easier. But you can leave a comment, and I would really welcome. I do read every comment. I do. Don't always respond, but I read every comment. But people reached out to me, mostly email, and they basically said, hey, thanks, but you're wrong. And frankly, they're right. I was wrong. At least I was wrong in the way that I portrayed it. I did not mean to say that it is illegal for appraisers to do evaluations. In fact, I got on a forum. It was not the All-Star Team forum on Facebook. It was another appraiser-related forum. And I kind of got into a bit of a back and forth. I wouldn't call it an argument. I wouldn't call it a battle. But I would say that I got into a back and forth with other appraisers on this forum about evaluations. And I basically said, hey, we're losing out on market share because we're not allowed to do these things. And everybody jumped on and said, Dustin, we are too allowed. We just have to call them appraisals. Okay, let me make it very clear. That is correct. Okay. We can officially, appraisers can officially, and this is where I want to clarify the record. In most states, in fact, it may be in all states, I don't know. In most states, I would say an appraiser can indeed do an evaluation or the equivalent of an evaluation. Okay. They simply have to call it an appraisal, and they have to be USPAP compliant. Let me repeat that. In most states, if not all of them, an appraiser can do an evaluation. Okay. Now I don't want anybody to misunderstand. Okay. I'm saying evaluation as a very specific term as defined in the interagency guidelines. You can go there, you can type in interagency guideline, you can pull up the PDF. It's quite extensive, like 200 or 300 pages. Type in the word evaluation. It comes up like 60 times. Okay. And read the definition. An appraiser can indeed, and I apologize if on the previous episode I did not make this clear, they can do an evaluation legally, but they're not going to be given the work. And that's where I want to clarify here. Okay. What I did not mean to say and what was taken out of context and rightfully, it's not the listener's fault. It was my fault. I was not very clear on this. I went back and I listened to the episode, and it sounds like I'm saying that we cannot, we're disallowed. It's illegal for us to do evaluations. That's not what I meant to say. What I'm saying is appraisers don't get evaluation jobs because they are an appraiser. Let me repeat that. Legally, we can probably do evaluations. We simply have to call them appraisals. Okay. But the reason evaluations are out there is because they are an alternative to an appraisal. In fact, those are the words used in the interagency guidelines. Evaluations, by definition, are an alternative to an appraisal. Therefore, what I was trying to say on a previous episode is by doing an evaluation as an appraiser, it automatically is an appraisal and thus is not an evaluation anymore. Okay, I know that's super confusing, but I had several people reach out to me and say, Dustin, I really enjoyed your episode, but you're wrong. We can do evaluations. We simply have to call them appraisals. Now, that is a correct statement. Here's the problem. As soon as you call it an appraisal, it's no longer a quote unquote evaluation according to the interagency guidelines. Okay, let me share with you a really bad analogy, but will hopefully help a little bit. Okay. Donald Trump is currently the president of the United States as of this recording. When Donald Trump gets on an airplane, It is impossible for him to get on an airplane that takes off and it not be Air Force One. Now, that doesn't mean he had, no, when I say Air Force One to somebody, they think of this big 747 that's all decked out with the presidential seal, and you know what I'm talking. When I say Air Force One, you have a very specific airplane in mind. But did you know that Air Force One is any airplane that Donald Trump is flying on? It can be a Cessna, and it would still be Air Force One. That would be its call sign. So it is impossible for Donald Trump to get on an airplane that flies and it not be Air Force One. It is impossible for an appraiser to do an evaluation and it not be an appraisal, except in a couple of jurisdictions, which we pointed out in the previous episode. Louisiana being one, Florida being one, Tennessee being one. I think there's a couple others out there. There's 5 that we know of that by law, at least currently by law, written into law in their state, appraisers can do evaluations and not call them appraisals and not be under the guise of USPAP. But in most jurisdictions, in 50 of the 55 jurisdictions under the U.S. Code, meaning the Marshall Islands, Puerto Rico, those all included, in 50 of those 55 jurisdictions, if you as an appraiser do a valuation of a property, it is by definition an appraisal. Just like if Donald Trump gets on an airplane, it is by definition now Air Force One. So it is impossible in those 50 jurisdictions for you to do an evaluation and it not be called an appraisal. It is an appraisal. It is USPAP compliant, and thus you can't really do an evaluation because it automatically becomes an appraisal. And the definition of an evaluation, at least according to the interagency guidelines, is an alternative to an appraisal. You can't have an alternative to an appraisal that's an appraisal. Follow me? So that's why on the previous episode I said an appraiser can't really do an evaluation. We're disallowed from doing so because when we do, it's now an appraisal. And because it's an appraisal, it now has extra scrutiny. I'll explain that when we get back from the break. I'm going to tell you a story, and I'm going to invoke a name that's going to kind of blow your mind, I think. First, I want to pause here and remind you about another company that will blow your mind. That's DataMaster. Folks, when I get on this microphone and I say that this program saves you 30 to 60 minutes per report, I am not jerking you around. I use this product, okay? And I'm telling you, the data that DataMaster brings into your report will save you a minimum of 30 minutes per report. Now, let's just take the minimum. It really saves you more like 45 minutes in my experience, but let's just take the minimum. What would you pay to cut down every appraisal that you do by 30 minutes? I guarantee I'm going to pay a lot more than I pay for DataMaster. Check them out. Go to datamasterusa.com. One more time, it's datamasterusa.com. Speaking of saving time, Alamode is one of the companies out there saving time for appraisers, and there's a reason that I use Alamode. Folks, all of the bells and whistles, I'm going to call them, the extras that you get by subscribing to Alamode are incredible. The time that I save because I'm able to use Smart Exchange, because I'm able to use Smart Adjust, because I'm able to undock my addendum from my regular report, because I'm able to use mobile and upload it and download it, that I can use quick lists and frequently or recently used comments. I'm telling you, folks. Oh, and the worksheet. Holy cow. Have you used the worksheet? Folks, I'm telling you, the quality and the efficiency are there when you're using Alamode. Check them out. Go to alamode.com or pick up the phone and call them. They love to talk to appraisers. It's 800-ALAMODE, 800-ALAMODE or alamode.com. You know, a couple of years ago, I switched over to OREP Insurance. I've never regretted it. I'm in the process right now, as of this recording, of renewing my E&O, and it is so simple. Why? Because all I got to do is shoot an email to Lori and say, hey, guess what? I'm coming up on my renewal. By the way, they will remind me. I just do it earlier than they do. I've had enough experience with AMCs out there with clients that cut me off 30 days before renewal that I start the process pretty early, like 60 days before. Well, folks, they're so efficient over there at OREP. It is such an easy process. So little has to be done on my side. It's honestly a 3-minute application. It took me less than that this year. And we're getting renewed. OREP is where it's at. Go to orep.org. That's OREP.org. And welcome back to the program, folks. We're talking today about evaluations. The question on the table is, are we allowed to do them? And I hope that during the first half of this program, I've established that yes, appraisers can do evaluations, but by definition, once they do them, at least in 50 of the jurisdictions out there, they're no longer evaluations. How do I know that? Because I went to the interagency guidelines, and the definition of an evaluation is an alternative to an appraisal. Therefore, folks, it cannot be an appraisal. Just as Donald Trump cannot get on an airplane and fly around the country and it not be Air Force One, whether it is that 747 that we picture or the Cessna or the biplane or the glider. Okay, whenever he's on an aircraft, by definition, it is now Air Force One. Once you do an evaluation as an appraiser, yes, you can do them, but all of a sudden they are now no longer evaluations. They're an appraisal. Now, I know some of you are saying, well, Dustin, who cares? So let's do evaluations. Let's make them USPAP compliant. Let's call them evaluations/appraisals. And then we're not missing out on that market share that you talked about in the previous episode. Okay, folks, I get it, but there is a problem. And the problem comes from the decision makers out there, the regulators and the bankers, the big banks. Let's put it this way. There is a reason that they want an evaluation. And continuing to use this analogy, right? Let me ask you something. How much of a process do you think it is for the Secret Service to take care of a non-Air Force One aircraft? What hoops, what restrictions, what regulations do they need to follow when it comes to non-Air Force One aircraft? Well, if you're talking about Air Force Two, or if you're talking about Marine One or Marine Two or some of those others, they might have some jurisdiction there, some regulations there. But if I were a pilot and I went out and leased a Cessna to fly to St. George, Utah, the Secret Service would really have no regulation there, nothing to do, right? But when Donald Trump, if I flew to D.C. and I picked up my good friend Donald Trump and I said, hey, jump on this aircraft with me, right? First of all, that would never happen. But second of all, that would automatically become Air Force One. And all of a sudden, the Secret Service would have all kinds of hoops to jump through, all kinds of regulation. I know it's a silly analogy, but stay with me, folks. As soon as Donald Trump is on an aircraft, it automatically becomes Air Force One. And thus there's extra regulation and scrutiny and security and everything else that comes with it. On a much lower basis, okay, I'm trying to make this analogy work. On a much, much, much smaller basis, when an appraiser puts a valuation on a property in most states, it automatically becomes an appraisal. By definition, it is no longer an alternative or an evaluation, rather. What does that mean? That means that with most banks, now, this is not written in, you're not going to see this in black and white anywhere, but stay with me. I'm going to tell you a story that will, I think, prove my point, or at least give a lot of support for my point here in just a bit. Okay. When an appraiser does a valuation, it can be an evaluation, okay? It can start out as an evaluation. They can do it just like any other broker or agent or anybody else that does evaluations. But as soon as they do it, because they are an appraiser, they have to call it an appraisal. And they have to be USPAP compliant. No problem, right? The problem comes with whether or not those banks or clients are going to accept it. Now, I know what you're saying. Because you're saying, well, Dustin, wouldn't the banks want an appraiser? Isn't the appraiser more qualified than an agent, for example? Folks, I had an evaluation done on my house about a year ago. I've told you about it on this microphone before. I'll tell you about it again today quickly. It was a disaster. It was a disaster. It was so far off. Well, okay, it wasn't that far off, but it was 20% off. And it was down to the nearest dollar. I mean, it was ridiculous. It truly was ridiculous. And there were so many holes on that evaluation. I looked at it more because I was curious. I got my loan. It was a HELOC. Big deal. It's taking $30,000 out, whatever. I got my loan. And that's what I think what most people do with these evaluations. They look at them, they go, we don't have a pool. Oh, well, got our loan. Moving on. Right? Evaluations are let's put it this way. Appraisers are more qualified than anybody to do an evaluation. Yet we are disallowed, and again, stick with me, I'll tell you how. We are disallowed from doing so because once we do them, they become an appraisal and they are no longer an evaluation by definition of the interagency guidelines. Now, I know what some of you are saying, well, big deal, Dustin. So call it an appraisal. It's no longer an evaluation. Big deal. The client got their money's worth because an appraiser, who is the most qualified valuation person out there, did it, right? Wrong. Here's what happened. I got on the phone with somebody, and I haven't asked to use his name, so I'm not going to. I will name drop here in just a little bit. But I got on the phone with somebody who I highly respect and has a very, let's just say this is a professional in our profession, okay? Is a great guy, friend of mine, knows his stuff. I'm not going to tell you how because it'll probably reveal who he is. But he and I started talking about evaluations, and he told me of an experience that he was in a conference last year. And in that conference, there was a speaker by the name of John Brennan. And many of you know John Brennan. Brennan is the vice president of appraisal issues at the Appraisal Foundation. He knows his stuff, right? And by the way, hats off to John. He's been very vocal. He puts YouTube videos out there. And I will tell you this, I reached out to John Brennan, honestly, not expecting to get an answer. I wanted to verify the story. Okay. And I basically said, hey, here's the story as it was told to me by a professional. I would like you to confirm or deny. Can I use your name? And you know what? Thank you, John. You are professional. I appreciate the very quick response. I first got an automatic email saying that he was out of town. And I thought, oh, bummer. I really wanted to record. Oh, well. And about an hour later, I got a response directly from John saying the story is true and you are welcome. And he clarified something, by the way. He said, it's mostly true. Let me, just tweak one little thing you said. And you can use my name. You know what? Good for you. Good for you, John. I think a lot of, I'm not going to call him a bureaucrat. He certainly is not, it's not a government position. I get it. But a lot of individuals in that status hide behind that secret curtain, if you will. And I've met John in person. I don't know if you remember this, John. We've shaken hands at a conference. Good guy. And I just appreciate him reaching out and saying that I could use this on the episode. But here's the story, okay? And hopefully John will correct the record if I'm getting it wrong, but I'm going off of memory, okay? But this is mostly true. So John was in front of a conference, and he said that he was at another conference, if I remember correctly, speaking to those who speak to bankers. So he's not speaking directly to the bankers, and this was the part that he clarified in the story for me. He's not speaking directly to these big banks. He's speaking to those that speak for the big banks or to the big banks, as the case may be. And the question that John asked was the question that's on the table today. And that is, why can't appraisers do evaluations, be USPAP compliant, get the certifications in there, do the highest and best use study, do the 3 approaches to value if they're needed, cover their bases, cross their T's, dot their I's, and do evaluations and get a hold of that market share that some say is 80% of all valuations in the U.S. being done right now on real estate are being done through either BPOs or evaluations. And for the most part, appraisers are not able to do those. So the question on the table was, why can't appraisers be USPAP compliant? They would be the most qualified people to do these types of valuations. Why can't we do that? And the answer that came back, I'm paraphrasing, of course, is because we don't want appraisers. And John incredulously said, well, wait a second, you don't want appraisers. Appraisers are the most qualified people to do these. And the answer that came back was, that's why we don't want appraisers to do these. Because once appraisers do these, they become appraisals, and there is an extra measure of regulation, an extra measure of hoops, an extra measure of quality control, an extra measure of fill in the blank that has to be done whenever an appraisal comes across our desk, as opposed to an evaluation. Now, let that sink in for just a bit. And that's really what I was getting at in the previous episode. The big banks don't want appraisals, don't want appraisers, because once an appraisal is on their desk, there is much more that has to be done on their side for the regulation side than they would have with a regular evaluation from, say, a real estate agent. Now, that's the story. Again, you're not going to see that in black and white, but I would say the story's got to be true if John's willing to go on the record and let me use his name and tell the story to you. So what does that mean for you and I? Folks, we are the most qualified individuals out there to do evaluations, but we are disallowed from doing them because once we do them, they become appraisals. And once they become appraisals, the banks don't want them because there's extra regulation that occurs. Now, I don't know what that means to you and I, but I'll tell you what I'm doing in my state, and I would highly recommend and encourage that you do it in your state, is that we look to these other 5 jurisdictions that we talked about earlier: Tennessee, Louisiana, Georgia, Florida. I want to say Virginia. I apologize, Virginia, if I'm getting it wrong. But there's 5 of them out there that specifically allow appraisers to do evaluation, but specify that they are not doing an appraisal and they're not acting in the capacity of an appraiser. Now, whether or not, and I said this on the previous episode, whether or not you choose as part of your business to do those types of things is up to you. And I'm not going to make a judgment one way or the other whether or not you do, but shouldn't we be allowed to do them? My purpose in this episode today is twofold. Number one, to clarify the previous episode. Again, thank you for those of you who reached out and corrected the record. I apologize I was not clear. So number one, clarify what I was trying to say earlier. And number two, encourage you, maybe a call to action here, encourage you to look at these other states and their legislation and see what you can get passed in your own states. We as appraisers are the most qualified people to do valuation for real estate. Yet because we are held to a higher standard with USPAP and with our state boards, we are, for all intents and purposes, disallowed from doing evaluations. Folks, there's a whole lot of business being left on the table, and it's going to agents. And I know what some of you are saying. I've heard the argument before. Well, Dustin, if we just refuse to do evaluations, or if we refuse to do hybrids, or if we refuse to do desktops, they're going to have to be forced to do full appraisals. Guys, I'm telling you, that's not accurate. As one who had an evaluation done on my property last year, I can tell you that's not accurate. It was not an appraiser that walked into my house. It should have been, but it wasn't. I talked earlier about the Appraiser Academy. Folks, we meet every month online. It's live. It's about a 2.5 hour meeting where I present something. Today we talked about desktops and alternative evaluations and setting up a business to run desktops and evaluations. By the way, as an Appraiser Academy member, you get access to all of the archives. So if you're interested in that, or VAs, or the future of appraising, or many other topics that I have put out there, join the Appraiser Academy today. It's less than $100 a month, folks, and you get an opportunity to not only look back in the archives, but you're also an honorary member of the All-Star team. And once a month, we meet together with appraisers across the nation, and we talk in detail about how to set up our businesses to be successful. Hope you will join us. Thank you for joining me today, folks, and we will catch you next time.
You've been listening to the Appraiser Coach podcast with Dustin Harris. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and post a short review on iTunes. For more in-depth insider information on how you can make more money as a real estate appraiser, visit theappraisercoach.com and sign up for the All-Star team today. Thanks for joining us. And now, get out there and create some value.
When an appraisal, let me back up. Excuse me, editor. Let's back up.